Earlier this year, I had an idea. I wanted to combine this thing with some recordings from this thing, and then add these things into the mix and turn it all into one big sound library. Since I've been doing so much more composing work lately, I thought it would just be handy to make myself this big old collection of sounds that more or less embody my own signature ideas and sounds, so that I don't constantly have to hunt through my other personal libraries or record a bunch of new stuff because, let's be real, that's tedious and I'm kinda lazy. What I didn't know is that this idea was gonna eat up the next year of my life. So why am I here now in the great white void telling you about all this? Well, I guess for that we need to sort of rewind and talk about how I got into this situation. For someone in my position, having done this type of thing for a while now and having created a lot of different instrument libraries and more sample packs than I really even remember, you would think that this would be a pretty straightforward job. As it turns out, yeah, not so much. For the first month or two, I recorded a bunch of samples from all this stuff and threw them together into a few prototypes to test out the concept. The horror box thing I built was easy enough to sample, but of course I didn't think about the fact that it doesn't really produce a specific pitch most of the time, so multi-sampling this to make a proper library was out of the question. The EMF microphone was equally a bit of a thorn in my ass. Although it made some really cool textures and tones and stuff, you can't exactly tune the sound of a light bulb or go and ask a parking garage to play an F sharp. Of course, sampling synths and stuff is the easy part, but with the other two components missing to make the whole idea work, there wasn't really much of a point. And so I once again found myself at that all too familiar stalemate of my ideas and ambition far outweighing my ability to actually do the thing. Next thing I knew, it was April, and time for NAMM. So I headed off across the country with my friend Ben. We did this whole project, it was super cool, and we ended up in California for the NAMM show. During the show, I was working at the UVI booth, and eventually we got to talking, and I mentioned this idea I had for this library I was trying to make for myself, and asking for some advice and such, and they gave me a ton of different tips and even offered to help me out. A little over 2,000 miles home and a bit of an ego check later, I decided to meet with the team to get the ball rolling. Hey, what's up? So normally I do every 6 semitones. Do we want to do that, or do we want more of a tight sample set? Because I guess it comes down. I spent the next couple months re-recording the samples and trying to push myself to get this idea to actually come to life. The horror box, naturally, was a nightmare to try and sample properly, but thanks to a couple tricks from meeting with the sound design team and a little bit of experimenting with some granular processing, I was actually able to get a solid collection of multi-samples from it. With that checked off the list, the EMF microphone was next. This was probably the biggest challenge, and the team and I were pretty stumped on how to make it work since it was such a critical part of the overall sound. But after tuning up the samples, I ended up finding a process thanks to a tip I picked up from a video from Marshall McGee to use some RM and FM along with a couple plugins to turn the EMF textures into actual multi-sampled synth instruments. Recording the synths was the easy part, and after that it was all wrapped up. A little bit of blood, sweat, and tears, and a couple bottles of bourbon later, it was October, and the raw samples were done, so it was time to hand things over to the team at UVI. The team and I met up a couple times to design the UI and work out a few prototypes to bring the sound engine together and take my absolute mess of an idea and turn it into a functional product, since they know a whole hell of a lot more than I do about turning these things into something actually usable. And after we were all in agreement on everything, it was time for me to ship off to Paris to get the details hammered out. I spent a couple weeks eating my body weight in pastries and working with the UVI team at their office to put together the final product and work out all the details of marketing and promotion and preset design. By the time the end of October rolled around, we all had one last big meal together, and back home to Nashville I went. Through most of November, we designed all the presets, and then I worked on scoring the trailer and worked with the UVI team to get all the other sound demos and photos and everything put together for the final release. And that brings us to now, in December, and it's time to finally release this thing because it's all over. But there's a little bit of a twist with all that. Back in Paris, one night during a meeting, we all just got to talking and had one final idea. Why don't we just make the whole thing free? So we did, and they even made it run inside of the free workstation platform so everyone can go use it. And that brings us back to the question of the day. What was the point of this whole video? It's easier to forget than we might care to admit for ourselves as creatives, but making art, or whatever, at least usually, isn't about making it for the act of safekeeping. It's about sharing it and letting it resonate and evolve through the experience and lens of others in ways we don't necessarily intend or even imagine. The point of all this being, maybe ego is the ultimate killer of art, despite it being a necessary ingredient in the process. I can do things on my own, and I will do things on my own, and I know that I am capable of that, but there's something in learning to admit to myself, especially as I now enter my 30s, that's only ever gonna get me so far in terms of being able to realize, I guess in the grander sense, my own creative potential. And maybe there's a lesson in all of this somewhere, or maybe not, I don't know, but I wanted to make this video just to share what I've learned through this whole process, because I think it's important, and maybe it will help someone out there working on something to make something. And I guess that's kind of the point of these videos anyway. Probably.